Major breaking news, a blow to Governor Kathy Hochul's ongoing anti-gun agenda today in the United States District Court for the Northern District of New York. Major win for the Second Amendment Foundation against the Cortland Housing Authority that was denying its tenants the ability to possess firearms lawfully under the Second Amendment. Let's break down this big, big win for the Second Amendment out of New York State, of all places, when we get back. Hey folks, I'm Mark Smith, host of the Four Boxes Diner, proud American gun owner, constitutional attorney, member of the United States Supreme Court Bar, and author of Israel Disarmed, What the 10/7 Attacks on Israel by Hamas Teach Americans About the Right to Bear Arms. We must always learn from the mistakes that others have made throughout history, so we don't make those mistakes here in the United States. Okay, this is a huge, huge win, great win for the Second Amendment Foundation and for the Second Amendment generally, out of the state of New York. In the case of Robert Hunter versus Cortland Housing Authority et al., the Cortland Housing Authority, which is basically a government-funded housing project, housing authority, where people live as tenants and people have to sign leases as tenants. Previously, they had banned the possession of firearms. So even if you lived in the Cortland Housing Authority, you were not allowed to have a firearm. Even if you qualified for firearms in all respects, and notwithstanding the fact that Heller in 2008 said you cannot ban handguns by people who want to have them in their home for self-defense purposes, among other reasons. Well, back in January or so, the Second Amendment Foundation, Robert Hunter and Elmer Irwin and Doug Murrin, brought a lawsuit seeking a preliminary injunction against the Cortland Housing Authority and the people that work for the Cortland Housing Authority. They're in New York State, saying that this is a violation of their Second Amendment rights because they were not allowed to have a handgun in their homes like all other Americans. And in January, Judge Glenn Sotheby, a judge who we've talked about before in the Northern District of New York, entered a preliminary injunction that said that this indeed was likely a violation of their Second Amendment rights of the tenants, and the government was indeed, as a state actor, violating these Second Amendment rights. That appeared to be what was happening, Judge Sotheby said. He also pointed out, and this is interesting, that there was a possible First Amendment problem because apparently when this issue arose, there were posts being made on the Cortland Housing Authority's website or Facebook page addressing this very issue of how is this constitutional and related topics. And the Cortland Housing Authority raised issues as to whether or not this was allowed. So the good news is today there is a permanent, I repeat, a permanent injunction has been entered in favor of the Second Amendment, in favor of the plaintiffs, in favor of the Second Amendment Foundation, and against the Cortland Housing Authority, stating that going forward, tenants are indeed allowed to possess firearms like any other American, and the leases, to the extent they prevent that possession of firearms, lawful possession of firearms like all other Americans get to do, that is stricken from the leases. That means that not only do the plaintiffs have the right to keep and bear arms in their homes in the Cortland Housing Authority projects and those apartment buildings, whatever they're set up as, homes, so too other people who may live there as well, even if they're not plaintiffs. This is a very big win for the Second Amendment. It sets another precedent that says that government, just because they control property, cannot ban guns. Now, this is not only a precedent in favor of people that live in government-funded housing, it's also a favorable precedent, potentially, in the sensitive places context. Because as you know, there are many cases and situations where the government in these anti-gun jurisdictions like New York, New Jersey, and California, Hawaii, and the like, are trying to make the case that if government owns property, they can deny people the right to keep and bear arms on their property because they're basically the owner of the property. But of course, that turns out not to be true here because presumably the Cortland Housing Authority is obviously owned or controlled by the government agents. Nevertheless, Judge Sotheby found this is likely a violation of the Second Amendment, and the government defendants rolled over and agreed to this. They agreed to this permanent injunction, seeing the handwriting on the wall, apparently. So this is a big win, again, not only for people living in government-funded housing, but also a big win in the context of rebutting any suggestion that simply because the government owns or controls property, a home, an apartment building, a parking lot, a park, whatever, a highway for that matter, That is not sufficient to allow them to ban guns at all. Huge win in that respect as well. And of course for First Amendment issues. So we should take note that here you have a government agency was trying to censor arguments and discussions apparently involving our Second Amendment rights. So we may very well have a powerful precedent here out of New York federal court speaking to the issue of can the government censor discussions of the Second Amendment's right to keep and bear arms? And apparently under the First Amendment, no, they cannot, which of course is the right answer. So just to give you some of the key language, this big win in this permanent injunction, final judgment, let me read you just a couple bits of the language of the court order that now applies and binds the defendants, Cortland Housing Authority, and their agents and representatives. Pursuant to plaintiffs' claims as set forth in the First Amendment complaint, defendants and their respective employees, agents, representatives, service providers, and or contractors are enjoined from prohibiting plaintiffs and all other CHA tenants from owning, possessing, transporting, or using firearms for full lawful purposes, provided they are otherwise qualified and in compliance with all federal, state, and local laws applicable to the ownership, possession, transportation, and use of firearms. It goes on to say, upon entry of this permanent injunction, the defendants and their respective employees, agents, representatives, service providers, and or contractors, having amended the original CHA lease to remove the firearms ban, shall ensure that the CHA lease, as amended, will not prohibit plaintiffs and all other CHA tenants from owning, possessing, transporting, or using firearms for lawful purposes. That's great language and a big win. And I should also note that the defendants are going to have to pay attorney's fees to the lawyers because under 42 U.S.C. 1988, which we've talked about before, if you are a prevailing party in a civil rights case, such as a Second Amendment case, your attorneys are entitled to their attorney's fees. And I'm happy to report that as part of this injunction, as part of this judgment, the attorneys for the Second Amendment Foundation have been awarded attorney's fees. Another good thing to make the anti-gun government agents pay where it hurts them, out of their wallets. And of course, we need to congratulate the Bachner law firm there in New York, the attorneys Ed Palzik, Serge Krimnus, and Meredith Lloyd, the three lawyers who won this case. It's always difficult to win a Second Amendment challenge against a state entity there in the anti-gun jurisdiction of New York, of course. So congratulations to the Bachner law firm and the lawyers that worked on this case. And of course, congratulations to all the plaintiffs, including in particular the Second Amendment Foundation. So a big win there in New York. Wonderful news. It's always good to get a final judgment in a place like New York. Serves them right. I hope Kathy Hochul cries over this. I doubt she'll cry, but I'm sure she won't be happy with this big loss to a state entity in her state of New York. So there you have it, folks. Hope you learned something here today at the Four Boxes Diner. Make sure you subscribe to this channel and like this video, and feel free to share it with your friends. Don't forget to follow me on X at Four Boxes Diner, and we will see you again very soon, I hope, here at the Four Boxes Diner.
Orders up. Table 2A.